Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, October 28th, 2019. Everybody, congratulations on your performance last night. We're going to talk for all 2 hours about the propriety of having booed and chanted "Lock him up" at the baseball game last night when Donald Trump showed up. As many of you have heard, it was a World Series. Now, I object as a progressive to calling it the World Series because for the most part, the rest of the world isn't involved. And I have boycotted World Series since 1969, which I guess was the first time that I was aware that there was a World Series going on. I probably wasn't even aware that the World Series was going on then, but I guess I was born during the 1960s. Okay, so I was alive during the 1968 World Series, and that was my non-progressive year. You can fault me for that and kick me out of the club. I guess we're really going to discuss this today, though I can't suggest actually spending the entire show on it. Bill has a better suggestion, as a matter of fact. Daily Co's Radio being live now. Tune in to hear Kagro X. That's me, David Waldman. You're hearing me now. Say, for a guy who says he doesn't drink, Donald Trump sure had a lot of booze last night. It's true. I did say it. I didn't plan on reading it out loud, but you can hear it all in Dolby Phonic stereo. Thanks for that technical term, Bill. But just by tuning in now, or I guess you could tune in later by podcast. Is it still Dolby Phonic? I don't know. Anyway, the point is, there was some news yesterday. Some of it was not entirely clear until the end of the day. But we're going to talk about what happened at the baseball game instead. No, literally, this is this is the topic of debate and discussion on Twitter this morning, which just goes to show you that we all have too much time on our hands, I guess. There's a faction of the country out there, and I guess it's a big one because it claims to be, and it was on television this morning. Morning Joe, I guess, included at least one admonishment from the Joe himself, telling us all that it was somehow unseemly to have been rude to another patron at a baseball park. I don't know if anyone is aware of this rule, but we all should probably start talking about it at some point soon. I did see literal complaints. I think actually somebody who we know and have read on the air had made some mention of, well, really there's nothing. I think it was Jed Sugarman saying there's nothing fun or progressive about chanting "Lock him up" at the ballpark, and it's just degenerative in general and a downward spiral from here, and making it like normalizing "Lock him up" chants, and I guess it's not, so don't worry about it too much. I'm not terribly worried about it, and to be fair, I've never read Jed Sugarman as like a guide for fun or anything like that. And I guess I'll object to defining whether or not you're progressive based on this, but I guess there's always room for discussion. That's what makes us progressive. Hooray. And now we can talk about it. Yeah, I also saw that Chris Coons was apparently lured into this stupid trap. I don't know, was he on C-SPAN or something like that, I guess? And they must have asked him, what do you think of the "Lock him up" chants? And probably the real answer is it's a baseball game. People chant stuff at baseball games. The ump isn't actually blind, and even if he was, well, that would just be insulting to the visually impaired patrons to just be screaming that out at him. And you don't know that for a fact, and I think you should wait for the investigation to close on that. But Chris Coons had lots to say. Lock him up, as he said, frankly, I think the office of the president deserves respect, even when the actions of our president at times don't. And I will congratulate him on this much. That was absolutely the Delaware of comments. You could not have been more Delaware in reacting to that situation than pointing out, well, the office of presidency, respected. All right. Well, at any rate, I don't know. Maybe Joe Biden he's very non-Delaware in his approach to these things. And really a shattering blow to those of us who relied on Major League Baseball stadium crowds for our substantive due process. I don't know how else to put it, but I'm embarrassed to be an American today. Okay. Well, at any rate, Many things like this go on at baseball stadiums all the time, football stadiums as well. I don't mean to be discriminatory. Highlight, for that matter, it can happen. We want to be inclusive here. The dog track, which, okay, and sometimes it's the dogs doing it. It's awful out there. And that's the way it is in sports stadiums. And frankly, it's very American somehow, in some weird way, to be able to do that sort of stuff. I'm not at all worried about what Donald Trump thinks about having been booed. That doesn't matter to me. The respect for the office, I don't think, was necessarily diminished either. Weird things happen at baseball games, and you should just get used to it. And honestly, if you're called upon on C-SPAN to comment on it, you just say, I don't know, man, baseball, that's the way it is. And probably you could have gotten away with it, and everyone would have been happy. But not Chris Coons. He had to shoot himself in the foot to do it. All right. Good morning, Greg Dworkin. How you feeling? Anybody booing you wherever you go, denying you your substantive due process rights at 7-Eleven or anything like that?
Well, you should try being a Red Sox fan at a Yankee game.
Yeah, right. I mean, think about all of that horrible abuse.
I like to step back and look at it in terms of kind of a political big picture here.
All right.
Okay. And I'm going to take a slightly contrarian for this show point of view.
Okay.
All right. It was fine.
All right.
That he got booed.
Okay.
I don't feel any sympathy, and he's not going to generate any sympathy for a couple of different reasons. One, he didn't bring Barron.
That's true.
He brought his grown-up kids. He didn't bring the kid who would get the most out of going to the World Series.
Believe me, there was discussion about this too. Well, he might not like crowds, and okay.
Well, he might not like being
booed. God,
you know.
Yeah, right.
But he wasn't there, and so open season, and this was a Nationals game. The national media, and especially the Washington-centric media, are in no position to disrespect Nationals fans. So they can do whatever the hell they want. Yes. It would have been a lot different if it were, let's say, San Francisco.
Right. No, that's as good a point as any of them, really. How dare you? This is Nationals fans' night.
Jared Yates Sexton, for example, tweeted, "This is a special level of dumb. Seriously, on the day it was announced the leader of ISIS was killed, the president was so despised he got mercilessly booed by a crowd that called for his prosecution, and all these people want to do is wring their hands and lecture about respect for authority." Man, what? I mean, Trump even had a therapy session which doubled as a press conference and lied about half the stuff that was going on. But instead of making a dignified presidential announcement and then leaving, he rambled on for 45 minutes showing just how disturbed he is. Okay, great. So he had that. And let's talk about respect for authority. But then Jared Yates Sexton says this is a special level of dumb. Just because a man becomes president doesn't mean he deserves respect or reverence. If he's a criminal, he's a criminal. If he's disgusting, he's disgusting. I go back to the W days. And the idea that the president said it, therefore it must be true. How about when you prove that they were lying, like about weapons of mass destruction? What about Nixon, when you proved that he was lying about not knowing about what was going on with Watergate and what was on the tapes? And what about with Trump, who all you have to do is follow Daniel Dale for just like a couple of minutes and know that he lies about everything all the time? So this reverence for the office of the president went out the window with Trump. I have no problem with the booing. On the other hand, when you're looking at the Democratic response from people like Coons, think about the Paul Wellstone funeral. Now, this was different because, again, it's Nationals fans, so you can't disrespect them. It wasn't partisans gathered at a funeral. But the downside of having something like that happen is that it feels good for a moment, and then it doesn't. Okay, and at the same time, you're seeing all these articles, and I can quote them for you, about how the Democrats need to approach impeachment, and they need to do it in a sober-minded, in sorrow, not anger approach in order to get the best benefit out of the impeachment process, no matter how gleeful they are about it.
Yes.
So if Coons wants to take that approach and saying, this is not what we want, we don't want to prejudge this. We don't want to lock him up before due process. We want due process and then lock him up. I'm fine with that.
What if they had been chanting lock him up at a soccer stadium in Santiago, Chile, but they meant Donald Trump?
Well, any one of a number of variations here. So I give Coons a pass. Somebody has to say that. You might as well throw him out there to do it.
I mean, it doesn't matter to me whether it's Chris Coons doing it, because who cares about Chris Coons? But
right, exactly.
I guess so.
Now, if
all
Nancy
right,
Pelosi had said that, it would be come on.
Okay, I guess. All right, I guess there's probably room for that. Of course, again, it wasn't. Nobody suggests that it was the Democratic Party as a body assembled at Nationals Park yesterday.
Right, but they would if they gave them the chance.
Sure.
They don't give them the chance. So I'm fine
right,
with all
sure,
of it.
Why
the
not?
bottom
But
line is, this is how the public feels.
No,
and also, the D.C. public,
yes.
right? And even though they went 96-4, whoever was in the stadium actually voting, D.C. doesn't always get the vote on things. But those from the suburbs of Virginia and Maryland and such that actually voted in the election voted 96-4 against Trump. Most probably. I'll have to check with Nate Silver about the odds of that. Mm-hmm. But the fact of the matter is, it was a anti-Trump crowd, and that's not surprising, and good for them. And it's American democracy. And you should see what happens in Britain when Boris Johnson walks down the street and people just accost him about what's going on.
Well,
it's
you
wonderful.
Should see what
and
happens
that's the
on
way
the
it's supposed
floor
to
of
work.
Parliament. The floor of Parliament, you get to yell that stuff there.
Yes.
Are they not refined? Are they not doing it in British accents?
Right. So too much hand-wringing. Just step back and look at it. But, if you're going to think about who's doing what and why and what the ramifications are, the Nationals fans are the perfect group of people to do this, because national reporters who live to hand-wring about what Democrats do versus what Republicans do can't really, do that with this crowd, because everybody loves the Nationals, and how dare you?
Yes. All right. Well, I like to.
I couldn't pick a better group to boo them.
Me neither. I mean, the Nationals, first of all, I don't know how many people know this, but they're the only team in the league with a 3-judge panel behind the plate. So, it's not just one umpire there. And it's a tradition to be able to argue these things, even though it does delay the game a lot in order to have to petition for certiorari when you
to umpire stacking. They want 2 at second base.
Right.
They want 5 in the outfield, and then they want 3 behind the plate.
And you can appeal immediately to Brett Kavanaugh for the calls as well.
Speaking of which, there's a great story in the Washington Examiner about that.
Yes. Okay.
Right.
John Roberts told him to call balls and strikes. He is doing it.
Well, let me read you the story. It's phenomenal.
All right.
And I'll tell you why. It takes Newsmax seriously.
Well,
in the Washington Examiner, a conservative outlet, which has some really good reporters like Dave Drucker and some really crap stuff. And this is one of the crap stuff things, but it's sort of funny and on point here. Yes. Crisis of confidence. John Roberts' impeachment role prompts recusal rumblings.
Rumble.
In an impeachment trial in the Senate, President Trump would look up to see one of his Washington establishment foes, Supreme Court Chief John Roberts, presiding over the historic proceedings from the days in the upper chamber. Mr. Trump, who's clashed with Chief Justice Roberts over the perceived political bias of the federal courts, would have to count on him for a fair hearing. And it's a prospect that's caused rumblings in Washington that the Chief Justice should recuse himself.
Really? How about don't clash with the Chief Justice?
Yes. Now, this all may be news to you who actually follows regular news, but it comes because John Cardillo, a conservative radio personality and host on Newsmax TV, sounded the recusal alarm. This is already a crisis of confidence among the American people that we have a fair system of justice, and when you have a Chief Justice overtly making comments that are derogatory to the President of the United States, take all speculation out of the process. So this is great. You have Newsmax, your crazy eccentric uncle, directing how politics should be done. By the way, that's the only quote. It's the only person who said anything about this. Only Newsmax is pushing this story.
Sure.
And somehow it gets into the Washington Examiner as if it's a thing. And one of the nice things, it's not the most important thing. I think baby jails and people who die and ethnic cleansing in Kurdistan thanks to Trump, these sorts of things are a little bit more important. But one of the nice things about not having Trump is we won't have to take Newsmax seriously as a source of advice.
Yes. Well, we never had.
We never did, but apparently the national press has to because, don't forget, it was always during the W years. Oh, my God, look what's on Drudge. Who cares?
Yes, right. Oh, true. Yeah, people did do that. I mean, it was wrong of them to do so. And I believe that the Office of Newspapers deserves more respect than that. But you know how
Is that a cabinet position? The Office of Newspapers?
Mm-hmm, absolutely. You got to respect the position of the
Dick
Office
Mulvaney
of Newspapers.
probably is acting chief of that, too.
Yes, most likely. I just want everybody to have respect, man. I don't know what to tell you. It was an exciting day. What can I say? And that wasn't even supposed to be the big news of the day, which I guess is the actual big news of the day is there was this big military operation. Everybody forgot about it, and we spent the first 15 minutes on the baseball game, which is fine by me.
It's pretty much how the day went.
Yeah.
And so,
good for me.
Yes,
bad
there was
for
a
you.
big operation.
Not
it
you,
was
you.
done
Trump did.
mimicking what happened in terms of how to present it with Obama, only Trump did it his style. Yeah. And it turned out that's really not so good.
No.
So
he ruined
it. As Brett McGurk wrote in the Washington Post, Baghdadi's death underscores what we've lost by abandoning Syria's Kurds, because the Kurds actually made all of this possible.
Oh.
And there's a report in the New York Times that the reason it was done in a hurried fashion is because of the unexpected Syria withdrawal. U.S. forces had to act quickly before Baghdadi moved. So the fact of the matter, and they've been waiting for him to move for months, so they didn't have to storm the compound, which is a little riskier, but he wasn't moving. And then they were afraid they were going to lose their assets, and so they had to go ahead and do this quick. So this happened despite Trump, not because of Trump.
Yeah. Well, I was lost there for a minute. I thought you said serious Kurds.
The Kurds of Syria.
Kurds,
Syria,
yes, gotcha.
apostrophe S, Kurds.
Right. I'm like, well, I don't know.
Yeah,
I'm
we
just
have
kidding
comic
about
Kurds
being
and
a
clown
Kurd.
Kurds, but we also have serious Kurds.
Yes, I guess so. All right. Well, yeah, I did. I read about that. There was all sorts of fun and confusion yesterday, but I think everything has pretty much been straightened out, and
So it's pretty clear after he makes the announcement.
Yes.
And then everybody's going to take him seriously. And then 3 minutes after the announcement where you take him seriously, then he goes into about 40 minutes worth of therapy.
Right. He had 30 minutes
about how
written.
I'm right and everybody sucks and God gave this to me to do and you should all worship me and I can't believe it. And I'm thinking to myself as I'm listening to this rant that about 24 to 48 hours later, when he, quote, doesn't get the credit he deserves, unquote, he's going to do hate ranting like you never saw.
Yeah, well, it's about time now. I don't know if he's up yet. But
after the baseball game, I'm not sure.
Yeah, late night. He left early, by the way. I mean, a lot of people leave. Well, not World Series games typically, but
right. So here's an Amy Walter comment, for example. What impact could killing of Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi have on Trump's standing with the public? Likely little to zero. Late April 2011, pre-Osama, Obama was 46 in Gallup. Post-kill, he went to 52, and by June, he was 46. So sometimes you get a 5 or 6 point bounce. In Trump's case, I don't think so. I think what will happen is right now he's toward the end, the bottom, I should say, of his rating gap that isn't all that large, and he fluctuates. So right now he's at the 41 end, 40 in some polls. That's the low end. His high is about 44, 45. So he may go up a tick, but it's going to be temporary. And he may not even do that because, like you said, Sunday morning, not everybody was up, but everybody was watching the World Series.
Yeah, and right, and the day just turned quickly. But because, like you said, he ruined it. He had 3 minutes of good text prepared for the announcement, and many people I saw commenting, had he just ended there, there might have been a small bounce in it for him. I mean, I hate to reduce it to the question of the polling bounce, but if that's the question, he could have had that, but he stepped on it.
Right, or as G. Elliott Morris put it, Game 5 is the biggest anti-Trump rally yet. 41,000 people fit into Nationals Park.
Yeah, right. Well, so it was pretty clear, and I don't think I've never seen so many videos from different perspectives. It was a very media intensive game. It was a Washington,
you got to see his
DC
face
thing.
as he started realizing that all the booze were there, and you got to see the smile wiped off of Melania's face.
Well, that happens a lot.
As both of them go stone faced as they realize they are getting like majorly booed, bigly.
Yeah, right. And I think they made the point as strongly as possible. I liked the videos where you could see what was on the screen on the Jumbotron, and you could hear people cheering when there were uniformed services members on screen, and then they switch to Trump, and then the crowd immediately turns to boos, and then more service members, and then yay again.
And it's not like they boo everybody,
crazy.
as you point out.
Right.
And one of the people, of course, who was honored that wasn't booed was the guy who threw out the first pitch.
Yeah, that was a big controversy in itself. I thought that was going to be the thing of the night.
Everybody was cheering. It was Chef Andre. So, they think he's a hero. They think Trump's a jerk. Hello, welcome to America. And one of the important things about that is media gets to see in real time their constructed, oh, my God, look at the rallies. His base will never desert him nonsense. Because a lot of those rally voters, as many stories have pointed out, are the same people. They're like, Moody Blues roadies who go from concert to concert to concert, and they know all the music. It's the same people.
Yeah.
And so, oh my goodness, this must be representative of America. No, it's not.
We'll see whether this morning, I guess we haven't monitored MAGA Twitter for threats to burn baseballs or anything yet. Or maybe, I guess,
well, again, it's a Nationals fan. You can't do that. So, again, the bigger picture, I think, is it's nice to have something spontaneous wreck the announcement.
Yeah.
Wreck the theory, wreck the narrative that people like to put together about how Trump is doing. Trump is doing badly. Now, that doesn't mean that he's guaranteed election. As Dave Wasserman puts it, you got to look at places like Erie and Green Bay, not just the bigger cities and the metro areas, because it's all about electoral votes. And even E.J. Dionne, writing in the Washington Post, has a column, Trump's madness is not enough to doom him in 2020, and talks about the impeachment wars and how you have to be careful. So all of that is important in terms of where we go with this. And on the one hand, if you look at the electorate, we're in pretty good shape for 2020. But if you assume that he'll be impeached but not removed by the Senate, which is a reasonable bet, although I don't think it's a sure one because there's a lot of murmurings about senators, and we'll talk about that next. Nonetheless, you still have to look at 2020. And his base is white evangelicals. That's what I consider his base, and they're not going to be moved. And that's not the point, and that's not important. It's everybody else. And so E.J. Dionne says, if Trump's approach to impeachment seems undisciplined, its main purpose is to incite rage, energy, and turnout among those who put him in the White House. So we know what the story is. More people would like Trump to lose than win. But if Trump could succeed in places like Sheboygan and Erie and Green Bay and turn out those voters who didn't show up in 2016 using Facebook and all the billions of dollars they have to spend, that makes him competitive. And so because he's competitive, he could win. What are the odds? Actually, I looked up the odds this morning because I always get sick and tired of people telling me that Trump is the favorite. He's not. It's difficult to beat incumbents. I get that. But he's not the favorite. And I went to the odds makers webpage, which summarizes all the betting markets overseas that you can use. And there's about 20 of them.
Okay.
All right. And right now, if you look under U.S. presidential election winning party betting odds, this is a British site, so it's done in fractions. But basically, the Democrats are 55 to 57% chance of winning.
Okay.
Right? That is not a lock. It's a close election. Either one can win when you're talking about 55-45. But if you define being the favorite as having the odds in your favor, Trump is not the favorite.
Okay. Well,
he is not.
I'm for that.
So, I'm just saying that's where things stand there. As far as the senators go.
Yeah.
All right. A couple of interesting articles in the Washington Post. This one is, it feels like a horror movie. That's today's story. Republicans feel anxious and adrift defending Trump. You have quotes from actual people here. All right.
Sure.
And, everybody's saying, oh, look, if you ask me, I'm the jury. I can't decide on this. Don't talk to me. I'm the jury. We'll just have to wait and see. But Rick Wilson says at some point McConnell's going to have to perform triage to save the majority. How the Senate Republicans handle everything is all going to come down to how threatened Mitch feels and how worried he is about losing Colorado, North Carolina, and a few other states like Iowa and Arizona. And if Trump's numbers keep dropping in North Carolina, that decision is going to come sooner than later for him. For now, Trump's near absolute control over his party's base makes it difficult for Republicans to do anything but cheer him. I guess they weren't at the Nationals game,
Right.
or be uneasy in the shadows. And if the Senators were at the Nationals game, it would have been interesting to get the reaction in real time to cutting through the nonsense news they get.
Yes.
Even though polls show that a majority of Americans disapprove of his job performance. Everybody in their heart is nervous, said former Senator Rick Santorum. Now, that's important because he's usually a cheerleader.
Yes.
A Republican from Pennsylvania. During the Clinton impeachment, he tried to endear himself to the public as much as possible. This is the opposite. The base loves him, but the president isn't doing anything to win other people over, and that troubles Republicans who have to win support next year from people beyond the base. If it's so bad that you're getting Rick Santorum, to be honest, that's how bad it is.
Yeah. Rick Santorum, still in the news. Okay.
Well, he's a quotable Republican because
yeah,
most of
I
the people
can't
don't want to
understand.
go on record as saying anything.
Yeah, I guess that's all there is to it, right?
Here's Al Cardenas, right? They've decided that they're going to take it all grudgingly and privately, perhaps in disgust. They're not going to give up the farm, said Al, former chairman of the American Conservative Union. But he added, it's been piling on, and I see defense fatigue on behalf of the Republicans in the Congress.
Fatigue.
So if you look at the people who are normally the cheerleaders and they're saying, this is really tough, it's a tough game here, we're not sure we're winning, it's really not going for us, it's going against us. That's all important. And then the final article is from the New York Times, moving closer to Trump, impeachment inquiry faces critical test. And that's as you get closer to the president, want people like Bolton or some of the National Security Council people to testify. Trump invokes executive privilege, goes to the courts, prevents them. And that's where the Democrats have to turn around and say, we're not waiting for the courts. That's just an article of impeachment for obstruction.
Yes. Well, they can do
That's
that.
why Chris Coons has to be judicial about this.
Yes. Sure. Absolutely. But
We don't.
Yeah, that's actually true. And I guess, yeah. I mean, of course, it really would have been judicial to just say, well, baseball crowds, what can you do? But all right, whatever. He did what he did, and we'll be back to discuss more of what else was done in the other news right after this. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Boo, lock me up. I think I'm on topic now. Okay. Let's see. When we were on our way out the door, we had a reminder to ourselves. Yes, Virginia. Right. Okay. I don't know whether that's directly where we're going, but I didn't want to lose track.
Right. Virginia. We're going to talk about some new Virginia polling on the state election this morning that just came out. But just want to finish up with both the booing at the, of course, they were just yelling, boog, boog Powell, boog.
Yeah, well, some of them may have done that. There are a lot of, old-time
A lot of
Orioles fans
you
in
know,
the
old-time
crowd. Sure.
people.
Yep.
So do you know who's a great Washington baseball team that's a good time to remind ourselves about?
The Senators?
The Homestead Grays.
Oh, okay. Oh, all right.
Right? I mean,
Yeah.
in those days, we have to remember the roots of segregated sports and how wonderful that was. And I don't want to lose sight of that. Being that Washington is in the World Series and all that instead of the Yankees, that's fine. I wish it was against the Yankees, but so do they. Oh, well, they're going to play more, and we'll see what happens. So what happened at the game? Rebecca Traister writes, I'm of the opinion that masses of people booing the president on one of the stupidly few occasions he's ever been forced to interact with them is, in fact, an extremely valuable moment for our global standing, and anyone who cares about America's reputation should thank that crowd. Michelle Goldberg writes, truly gobsmacked by establishment types hand-wringing about ordinary citizens expressing their opinion of a fascist criminal president on one of the rare occasions when he faces them, because usually he's hermetically sealed.
Yeah,
and I can't wait
Good point, too.
for Van Jones to tell us all that this is the night that Trump finally became president. And this is the kind of pivot we've all been waiting for.
Yes.
So, yeah, it's all nonsense, and it's really nice going through it. As far as the Baghdadi piece goes, this is interesting. This is in The Guardian from England, because you're not going to get this in American news. Doubts over Donald Trump's dramatic account of Baghdadi raid. Footage relayed to U.S. Situation Room was only overheard surveillance and had no audio, even though Trump was graphically describing hearing Baghdadi beg and this and that and everything else. So just a reminder that everything he does is exaggerated. And no, it doesn't automatically work. And I was talking with David on the break, being reminded about there's times that stunts do work. Mission accomplished. Yes. And landing on the carrier in a codpiece and having Chris Matthews say that act by W, whether he was actually flying the plane or not, sent a thrill up his leg and all this sort of stuff. That actually worked for Bush as much as it was ridiculous for a bit. And of course, it came back to bite him, because mission accomplished is exactly what drove his ratings down after the election. When it became clear that a lot of this stuff was made up and Iraq turned out to be the disaster we said it was. We knew it, but the public didn't get it until it was too late. By the time 2008 came around and Obama was running, it was poison to say you supported the Iraq war, and that's one of the reasons why Clinton didn't beat Obama in the 2008 primary. So these things do have consequences with the public. It's just that everybody doesn't pay as close attention as we do, and people aren't as quick to do it. This is a situation where if Trump thinks he's going to use the Baghdadi piece for commercials and such, that's great. That's well within his right. And he's certainly right to take credit, even though he may well have screwed it up, according to all of the reports, because that's what presidents do. It's just like the economy. You take credit when it goes up and you take the failure when it goes down, and it doesn't matter that you had nothing to do with it. It's just the way that works. So I don't have any issues with that. And I would have been fine if Trump came out and said, we did this, and then left, no questions, no rambling, and you would have said, okay, you had a good day. By that night, he got booed. But he made it worse by exaggerating, by rambling, by going a full therapy session in live performance, and then having been booed. So what's going to happen? What are we going to be talking about 2 weeks from now? We're going to be talking about the baseball game, not the Baghdadi announcement.
Yeah, I mean, that's a fine outcome for me. Exactly the opposite of what he was hoping for. He really was.
Hence the rage tweets I'm waiting for, because he's going to be mad.
I can't wait to see the way he expresses himself. But yeah, I mean, the whole thing yesterday, and not only was the press conference, off the rails, but just his idea of what was going on was off the rails. That there was a bigger than bin Laden thing, and just, I mean, everybody knows Baghdadi, and then the claim to have been the only one who knew about bin Laden beforehand seems like a little strange.
And nobody listened to him. You should read his 12 books. The funny thing is, he doesn't write his books, so obviously he wasn't the one to know.
Nor does he know what's in them, whether he wrote them or not, because he
doesn't read.
And never said anything like that, and he would never be able to check himself, right? Because he doesn't read. Right. It was bound to be a disaster once they let him get off script, but no one can keep him on anymore. Everyone's invested in letting Trump be Trump, which is fine, because that's
right. And meanwhile, the background is you have people murmuring. You have John Kelly and Mattis and some of the other people who were there. I wouldn't have done that. This was bad. It was much better when I was there. I was able to control him and all this other nonsense, which in retrospect is really CYA stuff for those people who want to either sell books or be on boards, and get handsomely paid for their service. So we have all of that. Anyway, what's the background? That's the background. What's actually happening? Elections are happening. I think November 5th.
Cannot stop them. Yes,
that's coming up next week.
1, 2, 3. Yeah, I guess so. Right.
In our new Waste and Center survey out today, we surveyed a sample of competitive state Senate races. We find that similar to our statewide survey, and this is Virginia we're talking about next week, Democrats hold a significant generic ballot and control of the General Assembly advantage in these districts, powered by de-enthusiasm and by advantage with independents.
Enthusiasms.
I don't have
So
independence.
thinking about the upcoming elections for the General Assembly in November, if the elections were held today, would you vote for Republicans or the Democrats?
Yes.
Republicans 37, Democrats 51. Generic.
Oh. 51
Right,
is oh, yeah, well, compared to 37, it's pretty good.
Right, split control 1, undecided 7, don't know
Who says
refused
split control?
4. So 12% don't want to say, but 51% are already voting for the Democratic Party if you're just looking at the generic ballot.
Okay.
Now, the survey also finds evidence that national conditions are affecting GOP fortunes in these races. We find that 54% of voters in these 4 competitive Senate districts that we looked at think
Virginia.
opening the impeachment inquiry was the right thing to do, and voters are more likely to support candidates. Here's the question.
Yeah.
Based on what you have seen, read, or heard, do you think that opening an impeachment inquiry to investigate Trump's actions regarding Ukraine was the right thing or wrong thing to do? 55% say the right thing and 43% say the wrong thing. And this is the specifically looking at 4 competitive Senate districts. There'll be a House of Delegates poll out on Friday with the election Tuesday. Who support impeaching Trump? In fact, supporting Trump appears to be a major liability to state legislative candidates. Right? Are you more or less likely to vote for a state legislative candidate that supports President Trump? 49% strongly less and 10% somewhat less. That's 59%. Strongly more 21 and somewhat more 14. So that's 35. So 59 to 35. 6% say no difference. 6% say no difference. You're talking about a local race.
Yeah, I mean, they're correct, but
And they're correct, but only 6% say
Yes.
there's no difference.
right.
So,
I mean, even I
this
wouldn't
race
say
has
there's
been
no difference.
nationalized.
Yeah, okay, good. She's always talking about that. And did we mention that this is it? Rachel Bidikofer's tweets about this is. I think we mentioned that before the break. We may not have said it just now, but if not, that's who you're reading.
Right. So that's assuming that you're going to have a lot of independents, Democratic leaning show up. But even in a more stringent likely voter model, these advantages still endure. So it's looking okay for Democrats in Virginia. And we get to have bragging rights about what it all means next week. Not that it affects the presidential election, but if you're talking about sentiment and people feeling sorry for Trump and somehow or other, what's going to be more important, the Baghdadi raid or the Washington Nationals booing, we get to talk about it on Wednesday.
Okay. Well, next Wednesday, anyway.
Next Wednesday, not
we could
this
talk
Wednesday,
about it
but next
Wednesday if you like.
On
That's
Monday,
fine.
we'll talk about the Friday poll, and on Wednesday, we'll talk about the actual results.
Yes, the Tuesday poll, the one that matters.
Yeah. So the only one that matters.
Okay.
But I don't like to say that because only losers say that.
Right. Yeah, sure. I guess that's true. I wonder what 4 Senate districts.
I'm not worried.
imagine
I'm
they were-
behind in everything. The only poll that matters is tomorrow.
right.
And then they took the only poll that matters, and you got
Oh.
clobbered. And you say, well, I think it's time to spend more time with my family.
Well, okay.
I'm trying to digest all of the things you're supposed
That
to say.
was the only poll that mattered, but the other ones were right. Okay. I mean, I could accept that.
Right.
Besides which,
Now, Alec McGillis
to go
tweets,
home.
wondering why everyone's so surprised about national fans giving Trump boos. Just because Jared and Ivanka live there doesn't make it Trump country. Right?
it's true.
Here's Trump's numbers in 2016. D.C. 4, Arlington 17, Alexandria 18, Fairfax 29, Montgomery 20, Prince George's 8. The major metro areas are deep blue. Goes to Dave Wasserman's point. That doesn't tell you about Erie, and it doesn't tell you about Dayton, and it doesn't tell you about Green Bay. But if you're looking at Northern Virginia, that ain't Trump country.
Yeah, guess not. Okay. I didn't see any other part of the game.
Well, there was no important other part.
Yeah, I guess not. All right. Who won? I guess it's still going on, so we'll find out later.
Right.
I forgot to look at who won.
Well,
I think the Astros won.
the Astros won.
Okay. So was that 3?
Because if the Nationals won, you would have heard all about it.
Yes, most likely. Incessantly.
Right.
No getting around
And again, that is why you find the situation that the press is really not able to properly criticize Nationals fans. They just can't right now. So timing is everything, and that was perfect.
Okay. I'm pleased with the way it came out, I think.
Right. All right. So basically, that's my situation read for today. and a little bit shortened, which is to say I actually finished on time today.
Yeah.
But I'll be back Wednesday, and we'll see how the fallout from the booing event, the big one, and the slightly minor event of Trump's press conference on Sunday being absolutely gonzo nuts.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about how it's all fallen out.
Okay, excellent. We can do that, and there might even be another sporting event that we can get the pulse of the national.
Well, he's not going to go to anymore.
That's true. Golfing. It could be. People can boo him from kayaks on the river while he's golfing. I just want to suggest that to everyone. Everyone can. I should open a kayak rental place.
Can you imagine? Right there, you are golfing, and all of a sudden, a big orange baby pops out of the water trap. You know, Secret Service would have a cow, I suppose.
Yeah,
and it might even be Devin Nunes' cow.
Right. If it's going to be a cow, it might as well be his.
Might as well. Take care, and I will talk to you on Wednesday.
All right. You do the same. We'll see you then, unless events force intervention in between. I think we're going to be okay. And, where to now? Let's see. Many stories in pocket. Well worth sharing. Let's see. That was one I meant for myself here, although that looked like fun. I'm sure it's political, so skipping that one. Let's see. I have to familiarize myself with which ones I put in. The order is going to be a little screwed up here. All right. Let's see. Just got to comb through. The weekend was so changeable and changed directions so many times that it seems like, the chronology of when things were filed is a little bit less telling than it usually is. Probably the Twitter feed is more telling. I'm the back and forth here. Anyway, I did see an interesting story that I needed to grab and bring up. Oh, I guess I might as well at this point say I haven't really. We didn't discuss the fact that Katie Hill has been forced to resign. And I guess that news broke last week, but the resignation came over the weekend. And I don't really know. I have nothing to add to what has already been discussed online on the Twitter hotlines, I guess, over the weekend. There are many sides to the story, and I don't know which one we're going to favor here, but we'll just at least acknowledge the news. She's been forced to resign. It sounds like she has a real, weirdo of a. I guess, are they still married? Husband? I guess soon to be ex-husband. Sounds like they're divorcing. However, I don't even really want to enter into it. I'm just gonna say I know about it. It's never good news when something like this breaks, and there are many sides to take the story. She had a complicated relationship, to say the least, although it can be straightened out pretty quickly if you read through the story. I'll let that one simmer for a little while longer before commenting on that one. And even then, when we do, it'll probably be in terms of, okay, well, what happens now? What does that mean politically for that district more so than anything else? And that might not even be a terribly cowardly thing to do now that I think about it, because, there's really no point in discussing the private aspect of all of this. That might even be like a relatively progressive way of looking at it. Okay. I'm at a loss over that one. That one caught me a bit by surprise. Anyway, also because it's so salacious, I will avoid it. It's a morning program, and I needed some afternoon time to think about this. Okay. Other items of interest. The one that popped up just this morning, I might as well just go to this way, see if we can't get our feet under us with this story. From the Daily Beast, I have the reporting, published today. All right, so early this morning. Boy, they get up early over at the Daily Beast. Ukrainian oligarch, we're talking about Dmitry Firtash here, the important one at the moment. Ukrainian oligarch seethed about, quote, overlord Biden for years. This seems like an interesting bit of background here. Betsy Swan and Adam Ronsley teaming up for this piece again for the Daily Beast. Dmitry, or well, when we say it, the anglicized Dmitry, but I guess they're in Ukrainian, Dmitro. Dmitro Firtash's lawyers, whoever they may be at the moment, say his team had to investigate Joe Biden to defend their client. One expert says Biden pushed reforms that cost the oligarch up to $400 million per year. Well, reforms that cost oligarchs money are usually not all that horrible from my perspective. Before we even scroll down, I'm guessing we're talking here about Firtash's lawyers. The ones I know about are Victoria Tensing and Joe DeGeneva, and it sounds consistent with their approach to the case. So I'm guessing that's who they were talking to when they referred to his lawyers in the subheader. Here's the body of the story here. Indicted Ukrainian gas oligarch, that's kind of funny, Dmitro Firtash, spent more than $1 million hiring key figures in Republican efforts to investigate the Biden family. I like the way that's put. Spent more than $1 million hiring key figures in Republican efforts to investigate the Biden family. Not his own defense, though he thought that would probably come in handy, I'm sure, for that defense. But $1 million on investigating Biden. His lawyers, who often go on Fox News to defend President Trump, we got the right people here, say they needed dirt on former Vice President Joe Biden to demonstrate that Firtash's prosecution was politically motivated. That's interesting, too, why they didn't seek dirt on the prosecutors general in Ukraine that were following up with that investigation. I have no idea, but that's probably because they don't speak Ukrainian, and also they don't care what happens in Ukraine. They only care what happens here. So, anyway, continuing on here, but the two men, Biden and Firtash, have a history, I guess. Two Ukrainian gas industry experts say the gas market reforms pushed by Biden and others in 2014 and 2015 hit Firtash in the wallet and badly. One knowledgeable outside observer estimated that the 2014 and 2015 gas reforms and legislation cost him hundreds of millions of dollars. On December 9th, 2015, Biden gave a speech to Ukraine's parliament. He praised the protesters who forced out Ukraine's Russia-friendly president. He recited Ukrainian poetry, how about that? And he called for reforms to Ukraine's gas market, too. The energy sector needs to be competitive, ruled by market principles, not sweetheart deals, he said, basking in the audience's repeated applause. People love basking. Firtash, who built his fortune in part through a rather sweet gas trading deal, hated it. Hated it, as they said back then. Earlier this year, it was actually much earlier than that, when that was a catchphrase. Earlier this year, more than 3.5 years after the talk, he was still seething. Well, that's what happens when you're an oligarch and your oligarch money starts drying up as a result of somebody's bad speech, or your idea of their bad speech. Firtash told the Daily Beast that the Ukrainian parliamentarians, bit of a tongue twister, the Ukrainian parliamentarians in the audience were humiliatingly subservient to Biden. Interesting perspective. He was the overlord, Firtash said. I was ashamed to look at this. I was repulsed. Now people linked to Firtash are at the heart of Republicans' efforts to find dirt on Biden, and a document Trump's personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, has said is key to his theory of Biden world malfeasance, was produced for Firtash's legal team. The reporter who published that document, are you ready? The Hill's John Solomon, whose reputation has been taking an absolute beating for the last week, and deservedly so. So, the reporter who published that document, The Hill's John Solomon, is a client of Firtash's new lawyers, Victoria Tensing and Joe DeGeneva. So, do take note of that. Tensing and DeGeneva represent a lot of people in this mix, and one of them is Dmitry Firtash. The other is John Solomon, who's so closely connected with him. By the way, Sam Clovis was also a client too. I forgot about that, and that came up, I think, during, was it Friday's show, when we were looking around at old articles. These guys are everywhere. Tensing and Geneva. Over the summer, Trump pressured Ukraine's president to cooperate with Giuliani's efforts. We all know about that. That pressure stunned many Republicans and gave House Democratic leadership the impetus they had long sought to announce an impeachment inquiry. And two Giuliani associates reportedly brought up Firtash's name when talking about their plans for Ukraine's energy sector. Those two associates also worked with Giuliani to find dirt on Biden, and they've both been charged with financial crimes. That's Parnas and Fruman, right? On top of that, Firtash's lawyers say one of them, Lev Parnas, had worked as a translator for his legal team. Another amazing coincidence. Firtash's blunt assessment of Biden's speech at the parliament and influence on Ukraine, shared earlier this year with the Daily Beast and published here in full for the first time, highlights how a battle over the future of Ukraine bled into the highest levels of American politics. Firtash's company did not respond to requests for comment. Biden's campaign called Firtash a Kremlin-friendly Ukrainian oligarch who's been wanted on bribery and racketeering charges in the U.S. since 2014. That is accurate and true. You should keep it in mind. We've discussed it as background. Keep in mind through all this, I don't know whether it's going to come up or not, but because so much of this focuses on gas markets and sweetheart deals and market rates, et cetera, keep in mind that Dmitry Firtash, as we told you, as we discussed on this show, and as I do not see discussed much elsewhere in the media, Firtash was a key player in formulating, some would say framing up, the charges against Yulia Tymoshenko, former prime minister of Ukraine, who actually found herself in jail over claims that she had been involved in corrupt gas deals in the past. The gas market in Ukraine is apparently the vehicle that you use to depose governments and jail rivals. That's just the way it is there. I mean, they might be working on reforming it, but to date, that's been the case. All right, so moving on to the next section of the article here. Gas man, interestingly enough. Firtash was born in Ukraine and, like many other up-and-coming oligarchs, grew rich in the rubble of the Soviet Union. After spending some time in Moscow, he started trading gas from Central Asia to Ukraine. His renown as a gas trader grew, and as he made deals with Russia's state-owned giant Gazprom to move Russia's abundant gas to energy-hungry Ukraine. With Gazprom's blessing, he got deals widely characterized as of the sweetheart variety. Firtash bought cheap gas from Russia, sold it for a lot more in Ukraine, and profited. He then bankrolled Russia-friendly politicians in Ukraine. One such politician was Viktor Yanukovych, who hired Paul Manafort. American diplomats at the time saw Firtash as a vector of Russian influence, part of the connective tissue between the Kremlin and Kiev. And American law enforcement, meanwhile, saw him as a crook. On April 2nd, 2014, the Justice Department announced that he had been indicted for authorizing $18.5 million in bribes to Indian government officials. The case involved efforts to mine for titanium that would be used in Boeing airplanes. He was all over the place. Austrian authorities arrested Firtash a few weeks before the DOJ's announcement. He posted about $174 million in bail and has since been living in Vienna, fighting extradition from his palatial corporate offices there. And while the allegation isn't part of the DOJ's indictment of Firtash, U.S. government lawyers have said in court that he's an upper echelon associate of a Russian criminal organization. Firtash says the claim is baseless. In June of this year, an Austrian judge greenlit his extradition to the U.S., but his high-powered legal team is still fighting. And this July, that team got some new oomph to Geneva and Tensing, a husband and wife duo who have worked on a host of contentious fights and have deep ties in Washington's tight-knit conservative legal community. They even reportedly secured a meeting about Firtash's case with Attorney General Bill Barr, a sit-down many criminal defense lawyers would kill for. And they may actually have killed. I really don't know. I can't tell you for sure. It's just simply not established as a fact. I'm just pointing that out to you. If you want to indict them for it or chant about locking them up, you wouldn't want to do that at a baseball game. That would be bad news. But that's where we stand in all this. There's another paragraph here. But again, just to reiterate, DeGeneva and Tensing, the conservative darlings, close to the Trump administration, are fighting the United States Department of Justice in their efforts to extradite Firtash. So just in case you thought they were super patriots, here's reason to doubt it. Anyway, Firtash's team has long argued he's the victim of a political prosecution and that the U.S. government only targeted him to blunt his influence in Ukraine. And that's where Biden comes in. All right, next section. In 2014, hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians took to the streets in protest. After Yanukovych's government killed dozens of protesters, he was forced out and fled to Russia. He left behind a $20 billion hole in Ukraine's economy, and the country teetered on the brink of fiscal collapse. Enter Biden. Okay. The vice president helmed America's Ukraine policy, and if they were on the verge of fiscal collapse, it's an important one. So he helmed our country's Ukraine policy, traveled to the country, Ukraine, multiple times while in office, and said he spoke to the country's president and prime minister, quote, probably on average once a week if you average it out over the last year. That seems like a little too much to have to say. Kiev was desperate for billions in support from the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, where the U.S. holds sway. The Americans and the IMF pushed Ukraine to roll out a host of reforms to get the cash. Sounds like a fairly familiar story. Let's see what we can get in before we take off for the break. The Obama administration, and Vice President Biden in particular, led the international community to help advance gas sector reforms in Ukraine, said a former State Department official with knowledge of the dynamics. So that explains his involvement in the gas market in particular and the overall reform picture in general. All right, we'll be right back after this. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's jump right back into our reading of the Daily Beast's article about, encompassing some of the new and old information about Dmytro Firtash, the Ukrainian oligarch behind the hunt for Joseph Biden, or rather the hunt for Hunter Biden, I guess, or perhaps both of them. They're really, of course, after Joe, more so than Hunter, but okay. Where do we leave off? Right. Biden wasn't the only one. Maybe we skipped a paragraph or two here. The Obama administration, here's where we left off. The Obama administration and Vice President Biden in particular led the international community to help advance gas sector reforms in Ukraine. Why? Because they were teetering on the edge of fiscal collapse. The former, was he president at the time or prime minister? Yanukovych, the former, I believe he was president, having fled the country for Russia after popular uprising, and as they said, left a $20 billion hole in Ukraine's economy. Not the time, I guess, for diving into exactly how he left that, but I guess he was stealing or diverting an awful lot of that money. And his absconding to Moscow did not fix it. He did not leave the money behind. All right, so where were we? Biden becomes a part of things. The thinking of the United States, the diplomat with knowledge of the dynamics continues here. The thinking of the United States was that establishing an open, transparent gas sector would be vital to Ukraine's fight against entrenched oligarchic corruption and would shore up the country's strategic stability in the face of Russian aggression. And it made a certain amount of sense. The gas sector was the vector through which the Russians were most readily able to exert softish control, I guess, depending on how you view the way they dealt in the gas market. Like if you wanted to deal in the gas market and they didn't want you there and they killed you, that's not that soft. But it's softer than, say, invading Crimea or the Donbass region of eastern Ukraine. Anyway, but the gas market was where and how they exerted the most influence there. And cleaning up the major source of corruption and the major source of Russian influence was probably a net positive, it was thought, for the United States. Okay, so that makes some sense to me. Mr. Firtash's control of Rosukrenergo. Remember the unpronounceable name of a mishmash of Ros, Russia, Ukraine, Energo, which I assume is energy, or something similar in one of the two languages, or maybe both. Mr. Firtash's control of this company, Ukrenergo, which exerted monopolistic control over regional gas distribution, would have been threatened by these reforms, the official added. Biden has touted his leverage over Kiev, including successfully pushing for the ouster of the country's then chief prosecutor, Viktor Shokin. Biden wasn't the only one pushing for Shokin to leave as part of Ukraine's anti-corruption efforts. The prosecutor had put in anemic performance, charging powerful and well-connected kleptocrats while in office, and the IMF, the European Union, and the Ukrainian anti-corruption activists all urged his ouster. Shokin had also scrutinized a gas company whose board included Biden's son, Hunter Biden, a fact that Trump and his allies have cited as evidence of corruption. They note that Shokin's replacement wasn't much better, but the reporter who broke the Hunter Biden story years ago reported that Joe Biden's overall anti-corruption push in Ukraine likely endangered the company his son was linked to. The Americans and the IMF also pushed for a series of reforms into Ukraine's energy sector, including the gas industry. By the way, I guess before I go too much further, there is a link to that story where they said the reporter who broke the Hunter Biden story years ago, that guy, reported that Joe Biden's overall anti-corruption push probably endangered his son, company his son was linked to as much as anything else, right? So who was that reporter and how do we know about that? It was James Risen. And the link here is to a fairly recent article in The Intercept, where he claims in the headline, if they allowed him to write it, I wrote about the Bidens and Ukraine years ago. Then the right-wing spin machine turned the story upside down. Sounds like an interesting take on it just because it's coming directly from Risen, but I gather that the story has mostly been told at this point and that we understand where he was coming from. But I just thought I would point out, well, who was that reporter? Because many of you will recognize him. So, continuing on here, the Americans and the IMF also pushed for a series of reforms to Ukraine's energy sector, including the gas industry. In 2014 and 2015, the Ukrainians unveiled a variety of changes. Kiev changed the corporate governance of its state-owned gas company, Naftogaz. It passed its natural gas market law, which the Prime Minister touted as having de-oligarchized and demonopolized the gas market, and it rolled out a basket of regulatory changes to its gas sector, with Biden cheerleading along the way. In a July 2015 speech, Biden praised Ukraine for, quote, closing the space for corrupt middlemen who rip off the Ukrainian people. All right, now things are getting serious. Middleman was an epithet often aimed at oligarchs like Firtash, whose gas business had raked in millions by acting as a broker between Ukraine's state-owned gas company and Russia's Gazprom. There is one of the biggest state-owned enterprises, which is Ukrainian Naftogaz, a gas company, that had very shadowy and non-transparent deals with middlemen and with the Russian Federation. Arseniy Yatsenyuk, the country's prime minister at the time, said in a speech just 2 days after Biden's. So last year, we eliminated this middleman. His name is Mr. Firtash. He is under FBI investigation and expected to be extradited to the United States. Alexander Karchenko, the director of the Center for Energy Industry Research Center, really? That's what it says. The Center for Energy Industry Research Center, I think one of those centers is superfluous, in Kiev, said the changes damaged Firtash's business interests. It hit him directly, he said. So that would be really funny if it actually had two centers in its name. But I don't think that's actually the case. But by the way, just before we continue on, Arseniy Yatsenyuk, the country's prime minister at the time, can I just take time out here and search him out on Wikipedia? Because if I am not mistaken, let's see. Oh, yes. Well, he is immediately preceded in office by, I guess this is still a couple of years here, by Alexander Turchinov. And let's see, he was, how far back do we have to go for Timoshenko? Wow. Am I going around in circles here? Preceded by Turchinov as acting, but that's odd. Let's see. Oh, okay. So the first time when he was acting, he was preceded by Yanukovych as prime minister, but Yanukovych was also president later on. And yes, okay. And was when he was prime minister, then when he was elected president, that's how she fits into this. When he was elected president, Yanukovych, Timoshenko was his successor as prime minister. And she doesn't get a mention so far in this story, which I think is something of a hole in the plot. Since our reading of Timoshenko's history as prime minister in Ukraine was that she was pushing for a deal with Gazprom that, again, eliminated the middleman. And she ran afoul of Mr. Firtash herself. And Firtash, as we read it in the show a couple weeks ago, was instrumental in helping get her brought up on charges that drove her from office. And she later filed suit in the United States under the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act to try and sued Firtash for his role in that, but ended up having the case dismissed in our country, which, I don't know whether I would agree with that dismissal or not, but at any rate, I just brought it up because I recognize the complaint here that Yatsenyuk, the country's prime minister at the time of the deal that finally drove Firtash from his role, he's commenting on it as saying, so last year we eliminated this middleman, and Timoshenko had attempted to eliminate that middleman even earlier. She landed in jail. This guy didn't. Firtash ended up getting arrested in Austria, and this time the plan worked out better. All right, on to the next section of the Daily Beast's article here, entitled Yes to Death. Let's find out what that's about. Firtash, for his part, saw in Biden a swaggering politician overstepping his bounds, and a Ukrainian audience embarrassingly enchanted with what they saw. When Biden came to Ukraine and he spoke in Parliament, I was reminded of an old story from the Soviet Union when the first secretary of the Obkom, the regional committee of the Communist Party, came, and on the one side, all the, Komsomoltsi, the youth members of the Communist Party, lined up, and on the other, the communists, I guess the old communists, and they all took loyalty oaths. You understand? That's how approximately it was with Biden, Firtash told the Daily Beast in February. That will not ring clearly and truly to anybody here in the United States, unless they are former residents of the Soviet Union. So he does himself no favors with that story. Biden's influence in Ukraine, he added, was enormous. Firtash saw Yatsenyuk, the prime minister at the time, as a pawn of Biden and other Americans. Who appointed whom, and who actually governed the country, he said. No puppet, no puppet. You're the puppet, we could have said. Firtash has also sparred with Andrei Kobolyev, who became CEO of Naftogaz under Yatsenyuk. Lev Parnas and Igor Fruman, the indicted Giuliani associates, reportedly discussed an effort to oust Kobolyev earlier this year. Reuters has reported that Firtash financed their work. Firtash's lawyers say scrutiny of Biden's role is necessary for his criminal defense. The U.S. and Austrian legal teams have always been focused on Dmitry Firtash's innocence, a spokesperson for Digenova and Tensing said in a statement provided to the Daily Beast. The U.S. Justice Department has submitted false and misleading statements about Mr. Firtash and the evidence in his case to the Austrian courts. That's a major charge, right? In the context of reopening the extradition case, the Austrian legal team sought former Prosecutor General Viktor Shokin's sworn statement as one of numerous statements and other evidence submitted to the Austrian court. The former vice president's role in Mr. Firtash's extradition is materially relevant to the Austrian lawyer's argument that the prosecution is political. The 2015 reforms appear to have cost Firtash a lot of money. It's difficult to estimate how much, as the oligarch's finances are quite opaque. Victoria Votsitska, I'm guessing again, was a member of the 8th Convocation of the Ukrainian Parliament and a member of its Committee on Fuel Energy, Nuclear Policies and Security. She told the Daily Beast that the gas market reforms have likely cost Firtash about $215 million to $400 million a year since their 2015 rollout. Wow. Firtash really was pushed out of Naftogaz's financial flow, Karachenko said. That said, many caution against overestimating the significance of the reforms Ukraine implemented. Firtash remains immensely wealthy and powerful and controls Ukrainian gas distribution networks known as oblgazes. Oblgazes. Oh. Okay, interesting. I love trying to pronounce this terrible stuff. I guess that's from obl is from like a oblast, which is sort of the Russian and I guess also maybe Ukrainian word for like region, province, something of that nature, a political subdivision. And gaz, we gather from Naftogaz, and Gazprom is gas. So regional gas distribution networks. Okay, so Firtash remains immensely wealthy and powerful, controls the Ukrainian gas distribution networks. And in the wake of the Maidan Revolution, he kept control of his assets in Ukraine. That would have been the revolution that forced Yushchenko out and to flee to Russia. Okay. So even after that, he kept control of his assets in Ukraine. Oligarchs still dominate Ukraine's energy sector, which is far from a bastion of transparency. Ed Chow, an energy expert at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, just one center in that name, said Biden and the U.S. didn't push hard enough for major structural changes. To be fair, Biden was the most senior U.S. official interested in Ukraine, he said. Without Biden, even less would have happened in terms of the U.S. government pressuring Ukraine. Ukrainians would have moved forward even less on reform. I would give the U.S. government a mixed grade. As an American political consultant who worked in Ukraine for years and spoke anonymously because of client sensitivities, said Kiev has honed its ability to satisfy Westerners without upending the status quo. The Ukrainians, if you look at their history, they've always been on the edge of one empire or another, the consultant said. They were used to dealing with viceroys, representatives of the Sultan, representatives of the Lithuanian Empire, the Polish Empire, the Russian and Soviet empires. They're masters at paying lip service to the guy who comes to town for a week. They will yes him to death, and then the minute he leaves, it's business as usual. But business changed for Firtash after 2015, and Biden stayed on his mind. And that's it. That's the close of this particular piece. Very interesting and a good backgrounder just to give us an idea of what might be driving the money behind the effort to pin something, corruption or otherwise, on Biden. I mean, there's obviously the political will for it in the Trump team, but what about the money? Trump isn't parting with any of his money for any of this. Where's the money coming from? The answer, I guess, is Dmitry Firtash, and that likely is where the money was coming from for Parnas and Fruman for their activities, both political and, I guess, extracurricular. All right, so that is pretty interesting. There are a couple more articles on that subject which I have kept in pocket, and we should see whether I can find those quickly or not. They've been buried under more recent stories about other stuff, but there are. I'll have to see if I can't find them rather quickly. There's so much other stuff, but I think we had put aside some more things about John Solomon in particular also, if I'm not mistaken. Let me see if we can't find those relatively quickly. No, there's that's something else along the way that has to do with Ukraine, but no, I mean, there's certainly much more information about the quid pro quo stuff as well, including more testimony due this week and clarifications on testimony given by Sondland. I guess he's moving back around to the likelihood that he will simply say, yes, it was explained to me as a quid pro quo, and we're just basically going to end up sticking with that story. Okay. Let's see. I'm not finding the John Solomon stuff, although maybe we covered some of it in the recent past and moved on from there. But it's difficult to see. It's been, like I said, been buried under so many other developments that it's difficult to keep track. We'll see if after the show, in digesting what went on, we feel like we have to double back on this thing. All right, let's see. There was this other article here, which I don't know if we ever got around to. But this, I guess, more on Firtash. A Washington Post article from October 22nd. Prosecutors flagged possible ties between Ukrainian gas tycoon and Giuliani associates. I don't know if that's new news at this point, but we'll see whether there's any extra detail in here. When two business associates of Giuliani, Trump's personal lawyer, were arrested this month on charges that they funneled foreign money, whose money might it have been? Firtash's, into U.S. elections, federal prosecutors working on a different case in Chicago took note. That would be the case for which they are seeking his extradition, I believe. The investigators had previously come across the two men, Parnas and Fruman, as they pursued a long-standing case against the Ukrainian gas tycoon accused of bribery. According to two people familiar with the matter, they, like others interviewed regarding the case, spoke on condition of anonymity. The Chicago prosecutors reached out to their counterparts in New York, where the foreign money charges had been brought, to offer assistance, the people said. Parnas had been working as an interpreter for the lawyers of the tycoon, Dmytro Firtash, since late July. Chicago prosecutors suspect there might have been a broader relationship among Firtash, Parnas, and Fruman, the people familiar with the matter said. The new focus on possible ties among the three men comes as the Ukrainian energy mogul has appeared to align himself with Trump and the president's allies as he fights extradition to the United States. Which is, again, I'm glad that came up again because what an awkward position this is, right? think about what's going on here. It's not inconsistent with the rest of what Trump is doing. Trump as president, outrageously enough, attacking the FBI, the Department of Justice, the CIA, entire swaths of the American executive branch under attack constantly from Trump. But this really crystallizes it, that Firtash has appeared to align himself with Trump and the president's allies as he fights Trump's government, which is amazing, interesting, traitorous, treasonous. It depends on where you want to. Somewhere in that spectrum is the answer to what exactly is going on here, and how exactly should you regard Firtash's attempt to align himself politically with the president in charge of his prosecution, who seems now to be convinced that it's best for his election if that prosecution doesn't go forward. That's an odd position to be in, and to be able to execute the laws faithfully. But he doesn't care about that. This summer, Firtash, at Parnas's recommendation, hired 2 conservative attorneys who are top defenders of the president. Now, that's an interesting and backward situation, or at the very least, the first indication of which came first, chicken or the egg here. Firtash hires Tensing and DeGeneva at Parnas's recommendation. But we also know that DeGeneva and Tensing hired Parnas as a translator for Firtash. The question is, was Parnas already, quote-unquote, translating? And I don't really think that's what he was doing. Was he already hired as a translator for Firtash by Firtash's previous legal counsel, which I believe, didn't we find out, was another of the Washington jackasses who's nominally a Democrat, but constantly doing things that screw us up, and not well regarded here in progressive circles. And I forget which one it was, because there's several of them. But someone can bring to mind, perhaps faster than I can, who his previous lawyer was. So I guess it's possible that this previous lawyer could already have been working with Parnas as a quote-unquote translator. Again, my guess is that I never believed that Parnas was doing he may also be doing translation work for Firtash, but my guess was just Firtash being a mobbed up guy, allegedly, and Parnas being a mobbed up guy, allegedly. He was more a messenger and conduit for a guy who was under house arrest and under close observation in Austria, but running a criminal enterprise internationally, and was sending out various messages and sending various, who knows, maybe physical objects, including cash, as well, through his courier Parnas, who was supposedly acting as his translator. And then when he switched attorneys, the translator / courier went along to the new team. But if that wasn't the case, what a strange little bit of information that is, that Parnas recommends to Firtash that he hire DeGeneva and Tensing hire Parnas as a translator, and we're introduced to Parnas's relationship with Firtash elsewhere as well. He was working as the translator. But if he's actually the guy who has enough sway with Firtash to recommend new counsel for him, that's an interesting tidbit, and I'm glad we picked that up. Meanwhile, Parnas and Fruman, Soviet-born emigres with deep business ties to Ukraine, had been assisting Giuliani's hunt for damaging information about Democrats in that country, an effort that is now the focus of the presidential impeachment inquiry. Again, not sure which came first. The Ukrainian energy mogul is now facing questions about whether he has played a shadow role in that effort, and I guess he has. The Firtash case has helped provide fodder for Giuliani's theories through one known avenue. In September, Firtash's Austrian lawyers filed in court an affidavit by a former Ukrainian prosecutor in which the prosecutor claimed he was fired because he was investigating then Vice President Joe Biden's son, Hunter. Oops, got to turn up the music on this one. Almost, well, I guess the timing is still right. Just didn't come up at the point. Okay, so in September, Firtash's Austrian lawyers filed the Shokin affidavit, right? Giuliani has since cited that document as evidence supporting his claims. Attorneys for Firtash denied that the energy mogul has any kind of business relationship with Parnas and Fruman. That seems like a new bit of information, too. That must be different attorneys. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, with a brand new interruption to say thanks to all of you who support the show. Remember when I told you that our average monthly donation was about $7, for which you were getting 2 great hours of news and entertainment 5 days a week, and how that came out to about 70 cents an hour? That's a pretty good deal, except it's wrong. The math actually works out closer to 17 cents an hour. It is hard to beat a deal like that, and even harder to send your kids to college on. Thankfully, Patreon.com makes it easy to make that work. Patreon, Patreon.com, is the simple, secure way to make recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Just search for me or the show name on the site, and they make it easy to crowdfund the show so that the power of our numbers can keep the show going for just a few bucks a month. Once again, thanks so much for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I guess we'll continue for the moment, at least with this Washington Post article, and I'm helpfully reminded by Patrick Cosgrove, who tweeted to me here on our KITM hashtag that Lanny Davis was the name of the annoying American Democratic, nominally Democratic lawyer that I was looking for, who was constantly saying and doing annoying things that we want to disown him for. And yes, that's true. And the switch happened when Cohen took his plea deal. That's another interesting observation as well. And as it turns out, I can see now Lanny Davis's name pops up a couple paragraphs down here, so it's a very timely reminder. Thanks very much, Patrick, for filling in as producer on the show. And appreciate it. Okay, let's see. So when we last left off, there was this curious bit. I just want to go over this one again. In September, Firtash's Austrian lawyers filed the Shokin affidavit, which, I don't know, since has been undermined. Shokin wasn't the one who ended up retracting his comments. It was the prosecutor general who succeeded him, who later reiterated the same accusations, but then even later than that, ended up retracting those accusations. And Shokin was the one who I think we revealed in reading one of the articles last Friday, and this may have been the one I was thinking of, that John Solomon was on his way that John Solomon was somehow connected in interviewing Shokin, that his pieces came from interviewing Shokin, and that, did we end up mentioning this, that Sean Hannity, too, was, at the time of Parnas and Fruman's arrest, also slated to make a trip to Vienna, as was Rudy Giuliani, the idea being that Sean Hannity was going to go to Vienna and interview Shokin as well, to just, get another round of these Shokin stories on the American media. But anyway, then we also noted that attorneys for Firtash, and it doesn't say who, whether that's DeGeneva and Tensing or not, I'm not sure, denied that the energy mogul has any kind of business relationship with Parnas and Fruman, which they might have taken to mean business deal, like something about gas, as opposed to, well, Parnas does have a business relationship with Firtash. He is hired as a translator by DeGeneva and Tensing for the trial. Now, they might regard that as a business relationship with them and not Firtash, so I don't know. That sounds like the sort of obfuscation that those two would resort to. Let's see. And then there's a bit more here. A member of his legal team said Firtash played, quote, no role whatsoever in Giuliani's efforts, adding his whole focus has been on his legal case. It just happens to dovetail perfectly with Giuliani's political case, which he claims is a legal case, which it isn't, because there's no charges against Trump. We already been through that problem. Firtash, who federal prosecutors have alleged has ties to Russian organized crime, has remained a powerful figure in Ukraine despite living in exile in Austria. He denies ties to organized crime and any wrongdoing in the Chicago case. In July, the tycoon changed legal teams, replacing longtime Democratic lawyer, here he is, Lanny Davis, with the husband and wife team of Victoria Tensing and Joseph DeGeneva, who appear frequently on Fox News to defend Trump and have served as informal advisors to Trump's legal team, including Giuliani. After taking on Firtash's case, Tensing and DeGeneva secured a rare face-to-face meeting with Attorney General William Barr and other Justice Department officials to argue against the charges, 3 people familiar with the meeting said. That makes a certain amount of sense in a corrupt way that meeting would in fact have taken place. It doesn't make any sense in Trump world that the Department of Justice should continue to prosecute Firtash when he's so useful to them in their case against Biden. So I guess I wouldn't be terribly surprised, except for how bad the optics are. But Trump doesn't seem to, care very much about that. But I wouldn't be terribly surprised if at some point the Attorney General directed the Department of Justice to drop or otherwise delay, anyway, the pursuit of the case against Firtash as a favor to him, so that he continued to provide them with the same garbage that they wanted against Biden. Maybe it's already happened. I don't know. Maybe an impeachment proceeding would bring that out. I think that would be a great avenue of questioning in an impeachment inquiry. Is there anybody at the Department of Justice who has anything to say with anything weird happening to the Firtash case in Chicago over the past couple months that leads them to believe that improper influence was being exercised by the Attorney General or any of his representatives, or the President or any of his representatives? If not, great, fantastic. You managed to avoid another area of corruption, and we only have you on 16 or 17 of them. Good, it would be good news for you, and I think you deserve good news if you didn't do this. A Justice Department spokeswoman said that the case, quote, has the support of the department leadership, unquote, adding, we continue to work closely with the Austrian Ministry of Justice to extradite Mr. Firtash, unquote. Tensing declined to comment on the Barr meeting, and if you read this closely, the Department of Justice spokeswoman declined to comment on Barr as well. Just says the department leadership. That's supposed to include Barr. It might include Barr. It might not include Barr. Maybe some of the leadership is supportive of the case, others in the leadership not so much. Or maybe Barr mouths words of support for the case because he knows how much trouble he'll be in if he does otherwise, but has behind the scenes done plenty to undermine the case. Or maybe none of that. I don't know. An inquiry would have to tell us. Spokesmen for the U.S. Attorney's offices in Chicago and Manhattan declined to comment on their investigations. In a statement, a spokesman for Tensing and DeGeneva said that Firtash first met Parnas in June. First met, really. Okay. And that Firtash has no business relationship with either Parnas or Fruman. So now we know who the lawyers are. They were, in fact, Tensing and DeGeneva, and that they don't regard Parnas's work as translator for Firtash as a business relationship with Firtash. No money has been paid to Mr. Parnas by Mr. Firtash beyond his work as a translator for the law firm, the spokesman said. And that is supposed to, I guess, be offered up by way of being a defense against the theory that Parnas's money, which he used politically in the United States, and, the charges he faces after his arrest, that money came from Firtash. Of course, that might not turn out to be true, but that's the claim of his lawyers. In an interview last week, Giuliani called Firtash an interesting guy, but said he never met him or worked on his behalf. I did sort of look at Firtash to see if he had any relevant information to assist his claims, Giuliani said. As far as I can tell, he didn't. I looked at maybe 20 of these oligarchs. He said he did not know whether Firtash had a relationship with Parnas and Fruman. It's none of my business, said Giuliani, but of course, isn't who's representing Parnas and Fruman in their arrests right now? Is that also Giuliani? I thought that Giuliani represented them. He represents them in some of their businesses, and that's pretty interesting that he would claim to be representing some of their businesses but not helping them on the criminal charge. He doesn't know whether Firtash has a relationship with Parnas. Well, I guess that's entirely possible, but unlikely. Fighting extradition is the next section here. Earlier this year, Giuliani expressed disdain for Firtash, asserting that the wealthy Ukrainian had ties to the Russian mob. It was this year, huh? At the time, Firtash was still represented by Davis. Ah, yes, now I remember. Who was also acting as a lawyer for Trump's former attorney, Michael Cohen, making him a top target for Trump's ire. Okay. Davis is being paid by, quote, this guy who's considered to be one of the high-level Russian organized crime members or associates, Giuliani told The Hill newspaper in March. The Hill, of course, where John Solomon was working, and now I have to open up that article to see whether it was a John Solomon article for The Hill. Just curious. Has it got a byline? Giuliani attacks Davis for representing indicted Ukrainian figure. 3/8/2019. It says Julia Manchester had written this piece. They wouldn't have required John Solomon's services on that one, but just thought I would check it out. So when Firtash was being represented by Lanny Davis, Democrat, who also represented Michael Cohen, who was at that point on the outs with the Trump team, it was Giuliani's position that Firtash was a dirty guy. Now that he's being represented by DeGeneva and Firtash, and in part that representation is being facilitated by his client allegedly in a different capacity, Lev Parnas, it'd be interesting to know whether he still feels that way. All right, continuing on with the article here. Firtash made his fortune through his ownership of a middleman company that sold natural gas from a Russian state-owned company to Ukraine's state-owned natural gas supplier, and from the Ukrainian company to consumers. Boy, he's in the middle of everything. That job required connections in both Kiev and Moscow. He has also invested in a network of factories and other companies, adding to his power through his employment of thousands of Ukrainians. In a 2017 court filing, U.S. federal prosecutors alleged that Firtash had ties to the upper echelons of Russian organized crime. The gas tycoon has been linked to a U.S. diplomatic cable linked in a U.S. diplomatic cable, and it's not the cable doesn't go to him, it's a cable about him. So a little bit of weirdness in the syntax here, but it does read, the gas tycoon has been linked in a U.S. diplomatic cable to Semyon Mogilevich, a Ukrainian indicted in Pennsylvania in 2003 on more than 40 counts of racketeering, fraud, and money laundering, and now living in Moscow. But he's supposed to be like the big hub of Russian organized crime, right? The FBI has alleged that Mogilevich, nicknamed the boss of bosses, is also involved with weapons trafficking, contract murders, extortion, drug trafficking, and prostitution on an international scale. Wow. In 2010, WikiLeaks published an internal U.S. diplomatic cable from years earlier in which then U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine William B. Taylor, back in the news again, wrote that Firtash had acknowledged ties to Mogilevich in a private meeting. Taylor wrote that Firtash had denied breaking the law, but said he needed Mogilevich's approval to get into business in the first place. Very interesting. So, hey, we love WikiLeaks again, right? All of a sudden. That's very interesting, too. Or maybe Trump now hates WikiLeaks. Not sure. A member of the Firtash legal team said Taylor's description of the conversation is false. Of course. Firtash has since insisted that he has no ties to Russian organized crime, telling Time magazine in 2017 that he was never Mogilevich's partner. Now, that's a different story, too. Partner? That's different. He's Ukrainian. Half the country knows him. So what? Firtash said then. Knowing him doesn't mean answering for him. That's what Trump says about his pictures with Lev Parnas. Firtash was charged in Chicago in 2013, accused of bribing Indian officials relating to mining interests in that country. He was arrested in Austria the following year at the request of American officials, but released on a $172 million bond and has been living in Vienna ever since, while he fought extradition. It's been going on for quite some time. In June, the Austrian Supreme Court ruled against Firtash, paving the way for his removal to the United States. That could be exciting. At that point, Firtash tried one last-ditch effort to forestall the long-delayed start of his U.S. trial. That month, the energy mogul met Parnas in Vienna through a mutual Ukrainian friend, according to a person familiar with the episode. At the time, Firtash was considering switching lawyers and asked about Tensing and Digenova. Parnas vouched for the couple, whom he had met through Giuliani, and urged Firtash to hire them, the person said. Tensing and Digenova, in turn, brought Parnas aboard as an interpreter the following month. A kickback, essentially, according to Tensing, who said she was impressed by him and his language skills and knowledge of the region. On July 23rd, Davis, who had been registered as a foreign agent to represent Firtash, filed paperwork indicating that he was no longer working for the Ukrainian. In a statement, he said he had been replaced by Tensing and Digenova. So I guess that raises the question, have Tensing and Digenova registered as foreign agents in order to represent Firtash? Or was Davis overdoing it? Unlike Davis, there's the answer, they have not registered with the Justice Department as foreign agents. A spokesman for Digenova and Tensing's law firm said that their representation of Firtash falls under a part of the foreign agents law that specifically exempts legal services from the registration requirement. So either Davis didn't know that, or didn't agree with that interpretation, or was doing a different sort of work, perhaps including other aspects of Firtash's business portfolio than just representing him in the extradition case. In recent months, Firtash's Austrian lawyers filed a court document criticizing the Justice Department in ways that echo Trump's own attacks on the department, according to a person familiar with the sealed Austrian proceedings. Okay. The attorneys argued that the case against Firtash was politically motivated because Andrew Weissman, a lawyer working for then special counsel Robert Mueller, had offered to resolve Firtash's case if he would implicate Trump and former campaign chairman Paul Manafort in Russian interference in the 2016 election. Very interesting. Don't know if it's true. Could be. In its response, the Justice Department noted the investigation into Firtash began more than a decade ago and that he was charged in 2013, long before there was a special counsel's office or Trump was even a presidential candidate, and thus could not be politically motivated, according to a person familiar with the matter, or at least not initially, but I guess could later become politically motivated. The department also disputed that Weissman had told Firtash's team that he could have the case dropped, the person said. So even that's in dispute. In response, an Austrian court has now reopened Firtash's case, putting his extradition on hold again. Next up, business and politics. This is getting interesting, isn't it? In 2018, Parnas and Fruman began a steep ascent into an inner circle of Trump backers, dining at the White House with Trump and breakfasting in California with his son, Donald Trump Jr. Giuliani regularly took the two men to official and unofficial events, including political gatherings, sporting events, and the December 2018 funeral of former President George H.W. Bush. I thought that was a bit of a wow when we found out about that. By the way, if Giuliani's claim is that he merely represents their energy business or fraud guarantee, I can't remember whether it's both or just fraud guarantee. Fraud guarantee is the last one that I saw definitely confirmed, but he may also represent their stupid global energy partners or whatever it was, that company as well. But if he's just representing fraud guarantee, what is he doing bringing Parnas and Fruman to the funeral and various other events and to the White House and to breakfast with Don Jr., et cetera, et cetera? Or is it just they're giving lots of money to Republicans and I'm glomming onto them because I have a relationship with them because I represent fraud guarantee and I'd like to ride their coattails since they're giving so much money? I'm not sure. The former New York mayor even invited the two men this year to an annual commemoration he organizes of the September 11th terrorist attacks. People familiar with the event said he has his own private September 11th memorial, leaving Giuliani's longtime colleagues in New York government scratching their heads. At the same time, Parnas and Fruman began touting their close ties to Giuliani as they pursued their own business interests. They also invoked Firtash's name as they sought business for a new liquefied natural gas company that they founded in 2018, according to two people familiar with the conversations. At an energy conference in Houston in March, the two made a pitch to Ukrainian state oil and gas giant Naftogaz, approaching the top official at the company, Andrew Favorov, according to a colleague of Favorov. And I think that's the same guy we were talking about in the last article, right? During a series of meetings, Parnas and Fruman proposed selling gas to the company, said Dale W. Perry, a former Favorov partner whom the Ukrainian briefed shortly after the meetings. Now, a former Favorov partner. I mean, I'm going to assume that there's no relationship between Rick Perry and Dale Perry, but does anybody know if that's actually the case? I mean, you'd think that would come up if there was one. But then you'd think no relation. But I guess they haven't mentioned Rick Perry in this article, so I don't know. Parnas and Fruman told Favorov that they hoped to see new leadership at Naftogaz soon that would be receptive to their proposal and the ouster of the then U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, Marie Yovanovitch, whom they perceived as opposed to their plans. By May, she had been removed from her post on Trump's orders. And remember here, I guess Parnas and Fruman are looking to set themselves up as the new middlemen supplying mostly, I think, American liquefied natural gas to Ukraine. They saw how Firtash made his billions in that business, and they wanted a piece of that. Yovanovitch, as part of the overall, supposedly as part of the honest American contingent to Ukraine, holdovers, really, from the previous administration that had made a project of trying to reform Ukraine's economy and gas sector in particular. She would have been concerned with the idea of new middlemen getting established in the gas market and would recommend to both the Ukrainians and the American government that be opposed. Not that it would necessarily have much effect on the new American government, but I guess they figured it would be better if she were just gone and not proposing that, at least to the Ukrainian government. They might listen to her, whereas the Trump government likely wouldn't, since they were giving so much money to Republican causes and were connected to all the right people. All right. In an interview, Perry, that would be Dale Perry, said Parnas and Fruman's grand plan included one other element that Favorov found puzzling at the time. They said Naftogaz should put aside financial disputes with Firtash, a decision that could provide a windfall of more than $1 billion for the tycoon. He was like, the Firtash debt? What are these guys talking about that? Or why are these guys talking about that? Perry said of Favorov. He just couldn't understand it. And I guess now we have a better idea as to why they would have brought that up. Favorov could not be reached for comment. So let's see. When was this, by the way? Let me roll back here. That was an energy conference in Houston in March. And when did we find out that Davis switched? Was that this year or last year when Davis dropped their representation, or his representation of Firtash, and Tensing and DeGeneva moved in? When was that? Was that... let's see. Earlier this year, Firtash was still represented by Davis. So that must have been in, we said June or July. So before they were hired to translate by Tensing and DeGeneva, they were in Houston telling the head of Naftogaz that they should drop or renegotiate the Firtash debt. But of course, Tensing and DeGeneva claim that Parnas has no business relationship with Firtash. He just happens to be advocating for dropping the Firtash debt or discussing the Firtash debt with the head of Naftogaz in March of this year. So, to no one's surprise, I guess, someone's lying in this situation, and it's very likely that Parnas is lying. He may be lying to Tensing and DeGeneva, and they may be passing that bad information on in the genuine belief that it's true, which would be foolish, but okay. So, that was happening in March. And let's see, we got down to this part. Favorov couldn't be reached for comment. Meanwhile, Parnas and Fruman were also assisting Giuliani as he sought information in Ukraine to prove his claims that Democrats received help from Ukrainians during the 2016 election and that Biden had orchestrated the 2016 removal of a Ukrainian prosecutor because he was investigating the gas company Burisma, whose board included Biden's son. In fact, the international community was broadly in favor of removing the prosecutor, Viktor Shokin, and the Burisma investigation was dormant at the time that Biden urged his removal. But in January of 2019, Parnas and Fruman helped connect Giuliani by Skype to Shokin, who alleged to the former New York mayor that his firing was connected to his Biden work. On September 4th, Shokin swore out a 12-page affidavit attesting to that same fact, a document Giuliani has waved on television as proof of his allegations. According to the document, it was prepared, quote, at the request of lawyers acting for Dmitry Firtash. Just not sure which ones. Okay. Well, that is also a valuable backgrounder piece. More time than I thought we were going to spend on Firtash today, but we might as well because, otherwise you're stuck talking about the vagaries of the Baghdadi raid, or even better, the discussion of the baseball game and things that went on there. Okay, I think our time was probably better spent on that stuff instead. Okay, let's see. Anything else that we want to bring up here? Yeah. Nah, not that one. Okay, it's about time for us to back out here then and get set to close out the program. I don't think there's anything else that we are likely to be able to fit in. But, man, this is it's getting to be a complicated octopus of a story here. And I'm going to have to do some sorting in Pocket to try to sort things out by topic so that we can move more smoothly from one story to the next. Okay. Let's see. I guess before I go, I can bring up one other thing. I did happen to come across this thing late last week, which was an exploration of the now private Instagram account of Lev Parnas. Shelby Holiday, Wall Street Journal reporter, happened to do the digging here and sent out a significant thread about the pictures that were in his Instagram account, and saying that the account reveals new clues about his access to the Trump family and his close relationship with Rudy Giuliani, including some pictures of him flying on somebody's private jet to I don't know where, a picture of him, Parnas giving the thumbs up, seated across the aisle from a cheerful-looking Rudy Giuliani chatting on the phone, pictures of Parnas with Ivana Trump, not Ivanka, but Ivana Trump, pictures of Parnas and Parnas' son at the White House with Trump in August of 2015, and on and on and on. So we'll pick up with that exploration perhaps tomorrow. For now, time to turn things over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Let's see what he's going to be talking about in his roundup. Let's see. As Trump and the corporate media fawn over the ISIS raid, there's still the shadow of impeachment in the background. On the rest of his menu here, public land workers are confronting an increase in violent threats and assaults as U.S. agencies fail to come up with any security plans. Took a stunt by a left-leaning PAC, but Facebook did take down an ad that claimed that
From
Lindsey
Daily
Graham
Codes Radio
supported the Green
on
New Deal.
NetworksRadio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
So there really was follow-up to the AOC question on that. And with almost 100,000 evacuated from Sonoma County alone and another 250,000 in the region under evacuation orders, 102-mile-per-hour gusts have exploded fires throughout the San Francisco Bay Area. Don't want to leave you guys out of the news. Stay tuned for that next.